Welcome to Divine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax.
Hello and welcome to Divine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax with Nora Devine. Nora has been a property tax attorney in private practice since 2005. She has developed a statewide practice in all jurisdictions in Illinois, and she represents all property classes. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is Fair or Flawed, the Ethics of Property Taxation in Property Tax. Nora, welcome back.
Thank you.
So let's dive in. In your experience, do you think property tax assessments are conducted fairly, or are there systemic biases that need to be addressed?
It depends on what era you're talking about. Is it, in the modern era, things have changed a bit. I think I've been doing this work for 20 years. I think in the earlier years, it was definitely, there was a perception that you needed to hire a certain type of attorney in order to get any kind of consideration, let alone any relief. So there was a big push to hire very clout-based attorneys. These attorneys were out there trying to be seen, rubbing elbows and golfing and going to birthday parties and having dinner 7 nights a week with important political figures and things like that. So there became this perception that you really can't get anywhere with your property tax appeals unless you hire somebody that is kind of in with the powers that be. That's all kind of changed. There was a lot of important investigations and important prosecutions recently about some of these politicians that were engaging in those clout-based practices. And so these days, the current administration in the assessor's office has gone so far as to even anonymize the submissions by the attorneys in order to try to clean up the reputation of the entire property tax appeal business. So, for example, as much as they like me or as much as they don't like me, that's probably not going to have any impact on how my appeals are decided, the ones that I submit, because it's anonymous and they don't know who submitted the documentation at this point. So that's how far, things have kind of swung in the other direction in response to those sorts of appearances that had gone on for so many years.
That would lead me to believe it was pretty bad if they went to those kind of lengths to fix it.
Well, there's been a lot of things that they've done to try to fix it. The first things they tried to do was try to limit the campaign contributions that were being made to the assessing officials. So in Cook County, it was particularly egregious. We had one assessor and 3 board of review members, and the property tax attorneys, and I know this firsthand, a lot of people would sit around and look at the campaign contribution web pages that are public to make sure that they were donating enough to keep up with the Joneses, to keep up with the other property tax appeal firms that were also donating to these politicians. And so all 4 of them, not these days, but in years past, they would have, a fundraiser every so many days. Whether they had an opponent, whether they were up for re-election, it didn't really matter. They would have these, fundraisers, and then you would feel pressure to go. And there was no limit on what you could contribute. So you had this kind of race to the top with all these firms like trying to be bigger than the other firms by giving more money. And then the legislature stepped in and they put in campaign contribution limits. So there's limits at the state level and there's limits at the county level. And now there's a gift ban ordinance at the county level that doesn't allow you to give more than, I think it's like $75 a day in food and beverage, and maybe some exemption for educational contribution. Like if you invite someone to a educational event or something like that, there's maybe an exception for that, but you can't give gifts and you can't give entertainment that exceeds the value of $75 in Cook County now. And outside of Cook County, there's all these offices that have ethical policies in place. They make it very clear to their staff what isn't allowed in terms of accepting anything of value.
Well, as a former Chicagoan, I am just floored that there was corruption. I can't even believe it. Blows my mind.
Yeah. And the other kind of corruption that we were seeing was that if somebody had a public office and then in addition to holding their public office, they also had a private property tax appeal firm, they were kind of wheeling and dealing, or the allegations were that they were wheeling and dealing and saying, I'm going to either bestow this public benefit upon you because you hire my law firm, or I'm going to make your life miserable in my public capacity and the public power that I wield if you don't hire my law firm. So we saw an alderman go to jail. He's actually currently serving a sentence for that very reason. He discontinued a parking lot permit. I think it was a driveway permit while a restaurant was under construction in his ward. And the federal government had all this wiretap evidence of him basically saying, hey, I've told you 3-4 times now to hire my property tax appeal firm for all of your hundreds of properties, and you haven't done it yet. And the person's like, I mean, I like my property tax appeal attorney. Like, they're kind of good, they counsel me well, they're getting me good results. Like, I don't really want to switch. And so he was on the wiretap saying to his public employee, it's time to play hardball with them. And he yanked a driveway permit and caused all kinds of commotion and calamity with their construction schedule. So there was a lot of
Wow.
professionals and a lot of employees that couldn't work as planned on this project because he decided to play hardball with them. So now he's serving a sentence in a public in a federal penitentiary.
Wow. That's a crazy
Yeah.
story.
Well, and as a property tax appeal attorney, you can imagine it's very hard to compete with these types of client solicitation practices over the years.
Mhm. How important is transparency in this whole process?
Well, we do have Freedom of Information Act laws that are definitely doing their job in the property tax realm. If you want to see an appeal that's been filed, you can do a FOIA request for it and you'll get it. Property Tax Appeal Board is particularly good at returning FOIA requests. The Cook County Assessor, the current administration, has done a lot to try to make the data more public and has been doing a lot better with, I think, FOIA requests since he took office. So there is this move in that direction. And then outside of Cook County, there are those assessing officials who will fight you to the death before they would give you their full data set. So it depends. There's 102 counties. And so, of course, it's always going to depend.
What are some of the potential consequences, both legal and reputational, for property owners or professionals who do try to game the system? I mean, obviously, one alderman's in prison, but what other consequences are there?
Well, we've seen people also get prosecuted for entertaining the assessing officials to a degree that was clearly designed to influence their decisions. So, and whether or not those verdicts have come out, guilty, not guilty, or whatever, that kind of a prosecution will actually ruin your life. So it's important that you don't ever have any conversations about like, well, if you do this for me, then I'll, do that for you. That's the kind of thing that the federal prosecutors are really looking for. In the legal realm, we call it quid pro quo. And you don't want anything to do with those conversations because it's very dangerous. And if somebody brings you a bag of cash, which literally happened a few years ago, somebody brought in a brown paper bag full of money and they were wearing—
I was going to say, was it a sack with a dollar sign on it? I mean, how obvious was
wearing
this?
a video camera. And so the dummy who took the bag of cash then got in all heaps of trouble. But so, yeah, if somebody's really explicitly saying, hey, I'll reduce your property taxes if you give me X number of dollars, they're probably wearing a wire. It's probably not legit. If somebody brings you a bag of money, literally, it's probably not. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And, the federal prosecutors are very much looking for corruption in this area. And just in Indiana, just across the border a few years ago, somebody was prosecuted for just saying, hey, I'll reduce your property if you make it, if you give me money. It's just that simple. And there was an assessing official who just across the border a few years ago went to jail for that. So in Illinois, it's a little more nuanced. I think the prosecutions that we've seen, it's like less explicit in terms of this for that, or you give me this and I'll reduce your property taxes. There's a lot of things that are left unsaid. And with the statutory framework that the prosecutors are working with, they do need something pretty explicit in order to bring down the consequences on the people who are behaving in those ways.
Why why is this particular area so ripe with corruption? That's interesting to me.
Because it's one person. In some cases, in many cases, it's one person that can cause your tax bill to be something very much lower than it otherwise would have been. And so if you don't have a lot of oversight in place, you don't have checks and balances in the office, you can end up with even just one employee, susceptible to corruption in this type of temptation.
How do conflicts of interest arise in the property tax assessment and appeal process? And are there safeguards to kind of prevent unethical practices when it comes to conflicts of interest?
A lot of the reporting that was done on the conflicts of interest area was really about how the Illinois Senate and the Illinois House and also the Chicago City Council, all three of them were run by private property tax appeal attorneys. And so, there was this feeling among property owners that if I want my legislation to be treated favorably, I need to hire one of these legislators. Or if I need, zoning help at the city level. I need to hire this alderman, So I think that's where the conflict of interest can come in, where you're wielding your power publicly to benefit yourself privately. So we've seen a lot of that, and that's what a lot of the news has been about. But this isn't new. I mean, it's going back decades and decades that aldermen always had like their own insurance business. So if anyone came to them and said, I need help with this problem I'm having in your ward, oh, maybe I'll help you. Did you know I have my own insurance business? Like who is doing your insurance? This kind of thing. And even now, it's like you've got judges that their spouse is a real estate broker, and suddenly they get these huge listings that they otherwise wouldn't have received. And so I think that the self-interest can creep in, because I don't think we pay our public servants a huge amount of money, and they're regularly rubbing elbows with people who are making considerable sums and that have considerable assets. And I think that's where the temptation is, that you want to live like that, but yet you've chosen to be a public servant. And unless you're in the Senate somehow, the U.S. Senate, or it's hard to become super wealthy when you're a public servant. So I think that's where the temptation comes from. I think having a clear gift policy in place is a really good start, and everybody needs to have a code of conduct in their office. And I think those are two really good ways to try to make sure that your employees don't fall into these patterns.
You brought up a really good point. I never thought of it like that. You have public servants who make a very modest income, but they're constantly around people who have a lot of money. And that could be very, very easy to become corrupted in that way. A little jealousy, a little, whatever. And then all of a sudden you get an option, and you might.
Yeah. And then there's also conflicts of interest with the way that in-house people hire their property tax attorneys. So I've seen it happen where they're not hiring the most competent person. They're hiring the person that will entertain them the best, the person that will buy them the most steaks, and the person that will take them on the most private jet rides and things like that. And, when you're working for a public company, your obligation is to represent the shareholders. It's not to, get yourself as thoroughly entertained as possible. So I do see some of that where the property tax attorney is out there at the golf course with the person who's deciding who to hire to do the property tax work, and they're throwing stuff onto the counter in the pro shop. Oh yeah, I need a new golf bag, and I need some shoes, and how about a new driver? And all this stuff, if it's a publicly traded company, usually you have a gift policy, and if you're going to be accepting gifts from vendors, you need to be able to disclose that and explain it to your employers. So that's generally the kind of thing that you also want to worry about when it comes to conflicts of interest. Hire the person that's going to do the best job for the company for the best price, rather than hire the person who's going to be, I like to say, the biggest clown, the biggest entertainer, the biggest, take you to all the hot sporting events and things like that.
Right.
Because that's all just kind of stinks.
Yeah, it definitely does. Is there one specific ethical issue in the property tax system that you would like to see reformed in the near future?
I mean, I think we're on our way. I think that there should be an inspector general at the county level, and even at the city level. I think that having an inspector general with real teeth who could actually remove people from office when they're behaving in these ways would be excellent. Right now in the state of Illinois, we are basically using the federal government as our inspector general. The assistant U.S. attorneys, who do an excellent job, are doing things that they shouldn't have to do. When you look at the numbers of how many aldermen in Chicago have gone to jail in the last 100 years, it is astounding.
It really is. I remember that. Yeah.
And it's always federal prosecutor
joke,
who's rolling up their sleeves and doing that work. And why? Why do we have to expend our federal resources in that way? Shouldn't every public body have an inspector general that can take these people out of office when they're behaving badly? I mean, I've seen politicians invite all their contributors and all their campaign donors to their child's christening. And it's like, oh, like, am I not supposed to bring a check to this?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
It's very,
we're just friends, right? You just want me here to
true friendship. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, an inspector general, they would be the most localized answer for looking into some of those kinds of things. Because as we've seen, the federal government can run into very strong limitations on what they can do with the way that the racketeering and the corruption laws are written to date.
Mm-hmm. What ethical best practices would you recommend to a practice, or do you follow in your practice that ensures the integrity and fairness in property tax matters?
I'm always educating my staff on the rules of professional conduct. In Illinois, we follow the rules of professional conduct for attorneys, and we take them very seriously. And I make sure everyone in my office takes them seriously. So I have them taking webinars, and there's copies of the rules in the office that everyone has access to. And every time that I'm responding and it has something to do with following the rules of professional conduct, I'm always roping in all the staff that we have to make sure that they're looped in on what I'm saying to whoever I'm saying it to. And so that we're all reading from the same song sheet in terms of how we're going to handle this, that, or the other thing. Personally, that's what I do. I think for government offices, what we see them do is they adopt codes of conduct for their offices, and then counties can adopt things like gift ban ordinances at a countywide level, which Cook County has done. And I think Lake County has also done. And every county really should. So that's one thing that people can do. And just also just setting a good example. If you go out to lunch with somebody who practices before you or has business before you, and you're a public official, like, pay for your own lunch. Just so that there's no confusion and there's no feeling like you owe the person something.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just don't put yourself into a situation, even if it's innocent.
For what?
Even
for
if
a
it's
burger
innocent,
and a beer, it's not worth it. You know what I mean?
It's not worth
$30.
it. Exactly. Yeah. It's $30. It's $30. Just pay your own $30.
And one of my mentors in this area, he says, don't even accept a glass of water from, he's a public official. He says, I wouldn't even allow someone in the private side to even give me a glass of water. And that's, he's a very influential kind of teacher on the assessing side. And everyone has heard him loud and clear. And a lot of people have adopted that same role for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, that's the best way to be completely clear, right? Is just don't accept anything. I get the sentiment for sure. All right. Well, thank you for joining us on Divine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax with Nora Devine. To connect with Nora and the team, visit thedivinelawgroup.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Nora, so good chatting with you. Looking forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.